guys, so this video is going to be about Coltrane changes, essentially what they are, how to think about them, and how to use them. So historically, in most early jazz standards, you'll find that they change keys or they modulate through keys in one of three ways. They can change keys by going through the cycle of fifths, so for example going from G major down to C major. Or they change keys by going down a whole step, for example from D major down to C major. Or they change keys by going down a half step, for example D flat major down to C major. Now, so in all of those examples, which you can see written up here in the picture-in-picture, I was just playing a 5-1, then changing keys and playing another 5-1 in the new key. So just to reiterate again, most early jazz standards tend to change keys in one of those three ways. And it's only very sort of occasionally and very rarely that you see early jazz standards changing keys by other intervals. So if I show you just a quick example to demonstrate this, let's take the song Satin Doll. Now that starts on C major, then goes up a whole step to D major, then goes through the cycle of fifths down to G major, then goes down a half step to G flat major, and then it does something a little bit different and jumps from G flat major down to C major, which is a tritone interval, which is not one of the three ways that I listed that most early jazz standards modulate between keys. And so that's sort of a little bit different and a little bit unique. So that was really just to demonstrate again that most early jazz standards tend to change keys in one of those three ways. And only occasionally and very rarely and very sparingly, sort of maybe once or twice in a song tops, do songs change keys by intervals other than the ones I've written up here. But this naturally raises the question, why limit yourself to only changing keys through intervals of a half step, a whole step, or through the cycle of fifths? Now this is where Coltrane changes come in. Now, Coltrane started writing songs where the key changed by intervals of a major third. So for example, he would start in the key of C major, then go down by a major third to the key of A flat major, then go down another major third to the key of E major, then go down another major third back to the key of C major. And again, I was playing that 5-1 relationship with each of the new keys. I went 5-1 in the key of A flat major, 5-1 in the key of E major, and then 5-1 in the key of C major. And so in this way, you spell out an augmented triad by going C, A flat, E, C. Now, Coltrane was not the first person to do this. In fact, it's thought that he got inspiration from the jazz standard Have You Met Miss Jones, which does exactly this. But he was the first person to use this idea extensively in jazz. And he was the first person to write a song that only changes keys in intervals of major thirds for the entire song. And so this idea of changing keys or changing key centers or tonal centers by intervals of major thirds has become known as Coltrane Changes. And the classic Coltrane Changes song is a song called Giant Steps. Now, I also wrote the voicings I was using up here in the picture-in-picture, just in case you were interested. Now, Giant Steps is considered quite a challenging song to play, precisely because of these unusual key changes that move up and down in intervals of a major third. And also because it is quite fast, and there are something like 10 key changes in 16 bars, even though there are only 3 keys that are used throughout the entire song. And those 3 keys are G, B, and E flat, again creating that augmented triad. Now, Coltrane changes are used to reharmonize 2-5-1s, 3-6-2-5s, and 1-6-2-5s. And the reason they work well as a reharmonization is because you're moving in a structured way. That is, you're moving down in fixed intervals of major thirds. And structure, to our ears, sounds pleasant and logical and nice. And the other reason it works is because you always end up back at the tonic on the last bar. Now, I've written it all out up here in the picture-in-picture, but essentially you can reharmonize a 2-5-1 by using Coltrane Changes, by playing that first chord, which is in the key of C, and then changing the key, or the key center, by moving down in major thirds. So down to the A flat, down to the E, then down to the C, and finishing on the tonic, finishing on the C major 7 in your last bar. And we're also inserting a 5-1 with each of the new keys. So you'd go from D minor 7, which is in the key of C, to E flat 7 to A flat major 7, which is in the key of A flat, to B7 down to E major 7, which is in the key of E, and then to G7 down to C major 7, which is back in the key of C, and then you're finishing up on the tonic. So in this way, we've reharmonized a 2-5-1 with Coltrane Changes by moving down in major thirds and creating this augmented triad shape and putting a 5-1, or putting a 5 in front of every 1. And you can do the same thing with 3-6-2-5 and 1-6-2-5 chord progressions. But then why stop there? Why not change keys using other intervals? Now that's a perfectly fine thing to do. For example, you can change keys by moving down in intervals of minor thirds. So for example, going from C to A to G flat to E flat back to C. So now you can reharmonize a 2-5-1 using this minor Coltrane Changes rather than the regular major third Coltrane Changes. So by going E7 to A major 7, D flat 7 to G flat major 7, B flat 7 to E flat major 7, and then finally G7 to C major 7. Or indeed, why not change keys by moving the key down in tritones, which is what we saw at the end there in Sat and Dol. By going D flat 7 to G flat major 7, then G7 to C major 7. And notice that 2 minor thirds is equivalent to a tritone. So then, in a sense, by moving down in intervals of a tritone, you're effectively just going down in intervals of minor thirds, but just skipping one. So that, in a nutshell, is what Coltrane Changes are and how they're used. They're essentially just moving the key down in intervals of major thirds, although you can use other intervals like minor thirds or tritones if you like. And they're used to reharmonize 2-5-1s or 3-6-2-5s or 1-6-2-5s that you find in existing jazz standards. Now, I'm going to have a lot more to say on reharmonization in another video where I'm going to touch on Coltrane Changes and then cover a whole bunch of other stuff and try to sort of give you an example of how you can apply this to a jazz standard. But otherwise, hopefully you found this lesson somewhat enlightening and interesting. And so go out there and try reharmonizing 2-5-1s or 3-6-2-5s or 1-6-2-5s using these Coltrane Changes. And then try improvising over these Coltrane Changes and try to find different sort of chord voicings that work for these Coltrane Changes. And you'll see, because they are sort of a little bit different and you don't sort of encounter them every day in your regular jazz standard, they are at first a little bit more sort of difficult and challenging and interesting to play. But like everything else, you sort of, with practice, it gets better and you get used to it. Otherwise, again, thanks for watching and see ya.